I often like to view creepy things on the internet. I don't totally know why. I've just always been intrigued by things that are just off. Any media is fine to take in the content. Stories, movies, videos, audio clips, video games, whatever. I just want to be unnerved. I work third shift, so my sleep schedule is all messed up. I sleep during the day and work at night. I get 2 days off a week though, and always in a row. I could use this time to have some semblance of a normal life, but I'd rather not have to readjust my sleep schedule once work starts again, so I just stay up all night and sleep during the day. So, browsing the internet on one of those days off, I came to a thread which had a bunch of links on it. Each comment was just a link. Some of them led to websites about unexplained mysteries, some were streams of horror movies, and others were accounts of paranormal events which were supposedly true. Then I saw one that was none of the above. I don't remember what the link was. It was just random letters and numbers. It was nonsense. I clicked on it, and it took me to a single page with a single picture and nothing to click on. It auto full-screened and refreshed at random intervals anywhere between roughly 2 and 10 seconds. There was text on the top of the picture which read as the following: Creepy. I liked this site. The picture showed a painting on the wall of a nondescript forest scene. There was a small TV screen centered at the bottom of the picture. An old CRT. On top of the TV was an old-looking analog clock with a wooden frame and fancy hands. The site continued to refresh, but the picture never changed. Out of sheer curiosity, I didn't leave the page. I kept the tab open and checked back every minute or two. Still, no change. After about 10 minutes, I got tired of missing the refreshes. Maybe it was changing drastically, but only once every minute or something, and I was completely missing it. So, I closed all other tabs to make sure I wouldn't be tempted to leave. I was staring at that picture for what seemed to be an hour. I checked my phone. It had been 26 minutes. I guess time goes slowly when you're just staring at a still image online. I can't say what it was or when it was, but at some point I noticed that it wasn't just a still image. Well, it was, but the image was changing. The clock, when I first pulled up the page, read something close to 4:15. Now, it was showing 4:56. The clock had been changing the entire time. I watched it for a full minute, and somewhere among the refreshes I saw the minute hand change to 57. The time on the clock didn't reflect the real time. Still, though, this was dedication. Someone had to take a picture once per minute for an hour, or at least 45 minutes, and then have it change every minute. I kept watching it until it showed 5 o'clock. I expected it to shift back to 4, but it just went ahead to 5:01. That's even more impressive. Maybe it went for a full 12 hours. Someone needs a job. Anyway, now I was hooked. I had to see if it had the full range of times. Now that I knew I didn't have to intently stare at the picture anymore, I was able to shift my focus to the text. It definitely seemed strange. I realized quickly that it was a code of sorts, and it said XIIXIX. I thought about it for a while, but then realized the colon in the phrase XII:XIX 12:19. I guess I had to wait until 12:19 to see what was going to happen, what was so worth all this work. The next few hours were boring. I check it ever so often and see no change. Once I thought I saw something in the painting, but I'm pretty sure that was just my imagination and my mind wanting to see something. I set all of my clocks in my house to the time on the site so I'd know where it was even when I wasn't at my computer. 12 o'clock came and I was glued to my computer. No getting up, no other tabs. I was just staring intently, watching the hands on the clock refresh minute after minute. 12:18. Refresh, refresh, refresh. I was certain that this minute had actually taken 4 or 5 minutes to transpire. Finally, 12:19. Nothing. No change in the image. No change in the site. That was disappointing. I figured I'd at least get a message on the site or a different picture or something. Maybe that was the prank. Nothing. The guy who made this would lure people in, give them a simple puzzle to solve just to pique their intrigue, and then disappoint them greatly. Bravo, I thought myself, or brava, I quickly corrected. I left the website and went back to my day. I couldn't get the site out of my head though, not even an hour after I left. I had convinced myself that I should go back to the site, Control-Shift-T. After all, there are two 12:19s in a day, aren't there? The clock now said 12:48. I looked over at the clock on my desk, and it also said 12:48. The creator must have kept it in sync with their local time or something. I had a nearly 12-hour wait ahead of me now. I could have stayed up all night for me, day for the normal people, but I didn't want to drive myself crazy, so I went to sleep. I didn't sleep well, or for very long, but then again I rarely do. I checked the clock on the desk, which was still set to the website time, and it said 8:52. Only a little over 3 hours to wait from here. I checked the site, and still no change in the image. I did things around the house and online to kill the next few hours. As soon as the clock was near 12 though, I was once again seated firmly in front of my computer screen. The next 18 minutes were agonizing. The last minute was even worse. The hands of the clock once again struck 12:19, and once again, nothing happened. I was distraught. I had invested a lot of time into this. The minute wasn't over though, so I continued to watch. I then heard a click, quiet but still audible. After that, I noticed that the web page wasn't constantly refreshing anymore. The screen on the TV began to brighten. Finally. What I had waited for was happening. As the screen on the TV brightened, I began to be able to make out an image. It was small, because the TV screen on my monitor was only about 2 inches wide, but I could still clearly see that they were showing woods. Maybe it was the forest in the picture. The camera was bobbing up and down as grass and leaves passed by. It must have been someone filming themselves, walking. The camera was kept pointed at the ground for the first minute or so, but then slowly started to point more horizontally. I could see that they were coming up on a yard. Some houses flashed quickly on the edges of the screen. There was someone talking in another language. I couldn't say what language that was, and then clicks and clunks like they were dealing with equipment. The camera made larger movements than before. I realized, as the sounds went away and the image stabilized dramatically, that they'd been setting up on a tripod. Once they got set up, I heard a little more talking, and then a camera made one final turn. During the turn, I could see that it was a setup just along the woods. The camera finally stopped shaking, and there was a house centered within the frame. As small as it was, I could tell that it was my house. I jumped up from my desk chair, but kept my eyes fixed on the screen. The men abandoned their camera and walked up to the house, walked up to my house. They stood at the door for what was probably 20 seconds, but it seemed like 5 minutes. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if there was anything to do. They knocked on the door. I heard it faintly through my speakers, but it wasn't at the door. Not hearing it within my house calmed me down enough to check the door. Nobody was there. Nobody was in the yard, but I couldn't make anything out past a couple 100 feet. It was dark out, and the moon wasn't very bright. I closed and locked the door, and ran back up to the computer. The screen was still displaying these two men standing at the door. They knocked again, but this time harder. I watched as the door opened. A man answered. I couldn't make him out. I was half expecting it to be me. I was relieved, though, to see it wasn't. I have brown hair. The man on the screen had red. One of the men gestures something to him, and the red-haired man begins to close the door. At this point, the other man shoves the door open again, pulls a gun from his belt, and shoots the man in the head. I felt my face go pale and my jaw fall open. My vision started to go black, but I forced myself to keep my composure. The two men ran from the door and toward the camera. In the small TV screen on my monitor, and in the blur of motion, I could still see that both men were smiling widely. They grabbed the camera, not bothering to take it off the tripod, and ran into the woods again. The camera swiveled on the tripod and showed one of the men's faces, but quite blurrily. He looked at the camera, reached over toward it with his other hand, and the screen of the TV went blank. The page refreshes again, but only once, and the clock still read 12:19. I exited out of my browser and even shut down my computer. I ran to the door one last time to see if I could see anything. Once again, there was no one there. To this day, I still have no clue what actually took place. I haven't had the nerve to revisit that website or ask anybody what happened to the people who lived there before I did, and I'm not sure I ever will. Before you listen to this, make sure you're alone. If you're in a room, close the door. If you're by a window, look outside and make sure there's no one there. The only way others should know about this story is by reading it or listening to it for themselves. Do not repeat this out loud to anyone. He will hear you. But you're able to read it for yourself or record yourself. Right now, these are the only two exceptions I know about. Once I think you're alone, look at the screen and do not take your eyes off it until you're finished reading or listening to a recording. He will know if you look away. It started on Sunday, November 4th, 2012. I'm in my senior year of high school and I had a wonderful girlfriend. We were at my house, mourning about school the next day, and we were terribly bored. She came over to help with a project that just had to be due the next day. I had hoped we would be able to fool around a little, but she needed this A or she would fail the marking period. We finished around 8 o'clock, and she didn't need to leave until 10. So, we had 2 hours with each other, and the only other person who was home was my 8-year-old little sister whom I had to babysit. My parents were at some dinner meeting until 10, but I knew them too well. They would be home around midnight, but I wanted to play it safe because they don't allow my girlfriend over past 8. They were afraid I would get her pregnant or something. We went on the internet because there was nothing else to do. She wasn't in the mood to fool around, and I couldn't stand another homework assignment. The internet was the only means of escaping these dull hours. We watched videos on YouTube for a while, looking up the newest popular videos until we ended up watching some creepypastas. We both have been watching creepypastas before we were dating, so we knew what to expect, and we had a hard time becoming truly scared of them like we used to. We kept trying to find some that would scare us, but the videos we watched weren't as scary as we hoped. By now, it was almost 9:30 and we were upset that none of the videos we watched were creeping us out. We were about to give up on searching until I saw this unusual thumbnail. All it showed was a man standing with his head looking down and hair covering his face. What was strange about the thumbnail was that there were no time limit and no author, just a title that read, "The Man Who Looked Down." We both agreed that this would be the final video, and if it didn't creep us out, we would give up. I moved my mouse to press on the video link, and the moment I pressed it, the video went into full screen, and the man I saw in the thumbnail was standing there. I moved my mouse around to find the loading bar, but it wasn't there. I pressed escape on my keyboard to get out of full screen, but the screen didn't move. For a second, I thought my computer was frozen, but in the video, the man was standing in what seemed to be a front lawn of a house I've never seen before, and the tree next to him was moving with the wind. My girlfriend and I had no idea what was going on, but I never took my eyes away from the screen. I felt like there was something that I just had to see, and if I took my eyes away for a moment, I would be missing it. I don't know how long my girlfriend and I stared at that man, waiting for something. It felt like a couple minutes, but while I was staring at him, I felt like something was wrong, like something was changing me. I actually felt scared. I don't know if my girlfriend felt it, but I didn't have time to think about that before I felt something grab my shoulder so tight the nails pierced my skin. I turned around to see the face of my father. He opened his mouth to say something but was interrupted by my girlfriend's ear-shattering scream. I whirled back around to almost scream myself. The man had looked up and must have run closer to the screen because all I could see was his face now, staring at me. The background was now completely white. The hair was out of the way to show his disfigured face. His nose was torn on the left nostril, allowing people to look inside of the hole into his head. His mouth was opening larger than any normal could bear. Part of his cheek was missing with a hole about the size of a large fist. He had no tongue and no top row of teeth, only a bottom row of dark, chipped teeth that were pure black. But the part of his face that will never leave my mind is his eyes. They were half red and half white. The white parts had red veins protruding out of them, while the red sides had white veins protruding. There was no sound, just him staring through the screen for a couple seconds before my computer turned itself off. I looked at the clock, and it was 12:30. This wasn't possible, I was thinking. It felt like 5 minutes. I looked back at my father, who also saw the face and seemed a little shocked himself. He pulled himself together and told my girlfriend to leave. She left without saying goodbye. My father then gave me a talk about disobeying and other shit, but most of the time I wasn't listening. I was too busy thinking about that man. He seemed to have moved the moment I looked away, which I couldn't understand how that could happen. There was also the fact that we started watching at 9:30 and had been interrupted at 12:30. We'd been watching the man for 3 hours straight without looking away or blinking. Once my dad was finished, I had to sleep. I wanted to talk to my girlfriend about the video and what happened. I woke up the next morning feeling like normal. I got out of bed, took a shower, and got dressed. I looked out my window for a brief second and noticed something out of the ordinary. It looked like a black smudge on my lawn. I looked again, and it was gone. I shook it out of my mind, thinking it was some stray cat or raccoon. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed my lunch, and started walking to the door to wait for my bus. At the corner of my eye, I saw something move. I turned quickly and ended up staring out my kitchen window. I walked slowly towards it to look outside. When I reached the window, I looked around my lawn, slowly, taking in as much detail as I could to see if there was any change. There was nothing there. I was starting to get scared until I heard the bus stop outside. I ran out the door and raced to the bus. Once I reached it, I almost collided with the door to the bus. The driver opened it and I walked into the shuttle. I sat down quickly and stared out my seat's window. Everything was normal around my lawn. As I was running towards the bus, I had the feeling of being chased. I felt like I was literally running for my life. I wanted to stop thinking about what was happening as the bus started to move. I looked away from the window and decided to listen to some music on my iPod. But when I looked away from the window, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move again. I looked back at my house just in time to see a man standing by on the lawn before the bus moved him out of my vision. His hair covered his face as he looked down. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? No, the man didn't do anything. Not yet. He was just scaring me. But how did he find me? Did I know him? I needed to talk to my girlfriend about this. I arrived at school and waited till second period to talk to her. It was our only study hall together. Once second period arrived, she didn't show up. I asked her friends where she was and they said they didn't know. I assumed she was sick and I would visit her after school. Her house wasn't a far walk away from our school. This wasn't like her. Her project was due today, and if she was sick, she would have texted me or her friends. The moment the last school bell rang, I sprinted to her house. I knocked on her door, and there was no response. I slammed on the door loud enough for the neighbors to hear me. Still, no response. Even if she wasn't home, my girlfriend's mom is a stay-at-home mom who is always home after school. I tried to turn the doorknob and surprisingly, the door was unlocked. I opened the door slowly and yelled in to see if anyone was home. No response. I yelled that I was coming in. I didn't expect a response and I didn't receive one. I walked into darkness. All the lights were off. I felt the wall for the nearest light switch and turned it on. The room was illuminated for a couple seconds before the light bulbs burst. I'm still not sure about what I saw in those short seconds, but I thought that there was a quick glimpse of a woman in the doorway to the kitchen. I found some curtains covering a window and opened them. The room was now filled with sunlight. I looked towards the kitchen doorway, and it was empty. I didn't go to the kitchen. I didn't feel like I needed to yet. I went upstairs to my girlfriend's room instead. I opened the door to her room and stopped. I was hit with an unexplainable, horrible stench. My eyes burned. Once my eyes were able to dilate, I saw her and him. My girlfriend was on the floor kneeling, looking directly at the man. Almost every inch of her body was sliced open and bloody. I just stood there, horrified at what I was witnessing. It seemed like an eternity of staring at the man and my girlfriend before my girlfriend finally spoke. All she was able to say to me was, "I'm sorry." Then she turned around to look at me, and her eyes, dear God, her eyes. They were sliced down the middle of each, making one half red and the other half white. I only had time to hold out my hand to try and grab her before the monster, fell on her and started to rip off her skin and devour her like a wild animal. I could only stand there and watch. Her heart-wrenching scream must have filled the entire neighborhood's ears. I turned to run, but the moment I looked away, I got pounced on. The monster slammed me to the ground and started to rip off my skin. Each time its fingers ripped off more skin and shoved it into its horribly disfigured mouth. I just screamed. My screams were almost as loud as my girlfriend's. I don't know how, but I was able to move myself and the monster towards the stairs. We toppled down them, and I felt my arm break. The sound of cracking bone filled the house. The monster fell off me, and I was able to get up and run towards the door. The pain on my back and in my arm was unbearable. I sprinted out the door and tripped on the steps. I felt my face collide into concrete. My nose was broken, and the skin on my face was almost completely torn off. I could still see through one eye as the other was covered in blood. It was standing in the doorway, looking at me. I was unable to move. I was in so much pain that I wanted to die. I was sure that the monster was going to kill me, but of course, that didn't happen, because I wouldn't be writing this. He just looked at me for a couple seconds before finally saying 3 unforgettable words.
"Don't look down."
I woke up in a hospital 3 days later. That's what my nurse told me. I was still in horrible pain, but the medicine helped to ease it a little. I never saw my back since then, but I'm sure the monster tore the skin off until there was only bone. The police came to ask me questions about what had happened. I tried to tell them everything, but as I continued to tell the story, it seemed more and more unbelievable. They thought I was crazy. They stopped the search for my girlfriend's killer days later because of unreliable evidence. The day they stopped the search was also the day I had gotten the news. My father had gone off the road and crashed into some forest. When the police found his car, my father was not inside of it. His body has not been found to this day. I'm sure that man had gotten him. There was no one with my father, so the man probably devoured everything. I left the hospital months later with an almost unrecognizable face, a crooked back, and a broken mind. I went home to find only my mother. She'd hung herself. I didn't bother to call the police. I went straight to my computer to find that video. After backtracking through my history, I found the video before. The Man Who Looked Down video. But it wasn't there. The video that had changed my life was gone. I gave up shortly after looking through other videos. I closed the web browser and started writing this. Halfway through writing this, I got an email. It was a video link. I knew it was the man, but I forced myself to click the link. There he was, standing in front of another house. But this house was familiar, because it was my house. He's behind me. I can hear his soft wheezing. I can smell his horrible, death-soaked breath. I can feel his eyes staring at me. He isn't looking down. He isn't looking at me. He looks for his victims on the internet. I'm writing this as a warning to everyone. Don't look for me. For once I get this story somewhere on the internet, I will turn around and look down. My only regret is leaving my little sister all alone. Please, forgive me, Julie.